Welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Was Jalen Brunson robbed of an All NBA first team selection? I'm going to get into it in just a second.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. And I want to remind you guys today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NBA for $20 off your purchase. Terms apply. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. And Jalen Brunson was named to the All-NBA second team. I'm going to get into that in just a sec. And just to give a little idea of what's to come in this episode, I had a great comment, or well, a couple comments, I guess, on YouTube the other day after I put out the like Knicks offseason roadmap that were sort of like, oh, can you explain how this works or that works as far as like the salary cap and the contracts and what's up with Bojan Bogdanovic's deal and what's up with this deal and blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, oh, I think it would be kind of useful to just kind of give a explanation of where every Knicks stands. So I'm going to start that in this episode and then finish up in a second part tomorrow about where every player on this roster stands, so that those that are interested in running it back, well, now you'll know exactly what would go into running it back next year and having roughly the same roster to try to, replicate what the Knicks did in January, but hopefully for a whole season. But first, let's talk about Jalen Brunson in this All NBA second team nomination here that he got. So Jalen Brunson makes All NBA second team. But of course, that means that the first team did not include Jalen Brunson, which I think a lot of us were hoping would happen. So first team ends up being Nikola Jokic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Luka Doncic, and Jason Tatum, who ends up jumping Jalen Brunson for that honor, despite the fact that in the MVP voting, so it's interesting. It was sort of a flip-flop between these two guys. So in MVP voting, Jalen Brunson ends with 142 points. So the way that these awards work is there's like first, second, third place votes. I believe for the All NBA teams, I forget if it's does it go up to 5 votes? Either way, there's like more points on the table for All NBA teams. But for MVP, Jalen Brunson ends with 142 points to 86 over Jason Tatum, but then loses the 5th All NBA first team spot to Tatum, 427 to 368. So in almost as big of a margin. Well, I guess it's percentage wise a smaller margin, but in a similarly large margin, he loses out to Tatum for first team All NBA. So let's just like look at the stats real quick. Jalen Brunson, 28.7 points, 6.7 assists, 3.6 rebounds per game. Jason Tatum averaged 26.9 points per game, so almost 2 points per game less. 4.9 assists, so almost 2 assists per game less, and 8.1 rebounds. So obviously about 4.5 higher rebounds there. About what you would expect, though, I would think, given the height discrepancy, position discrepancy between the two. And then Jalen Brunson shoots 47.9% from the field, 40% from three, and 84.7% from the free throw line. Jason Tatum shoots 47.1% from the field, so about 1 percentage point less, or 0.08, or sorry, 0.8 percentage points less. 37.6% from three, so about 2.5% less there, actually exactly 2.5%. And then 83.3% from the free throw line, so about 1.5 less from there. More importantly, I think, and I went and checked this number, maybe this is, again, where things come down on MVP versus All NBA. Maybe this is the crucial discrepancy that I'm missing here, but Jalen Brunson, per Basketball Reference, was a plus 11.8 on off this year. So his team got 11.8 points better in the aggregate when he was on the court versus when he was off the court. And I think that showed. I mean, he was very necessary to everything that the Knicks did this year, especially down that back half of the season. And then especially we saw in the playoffs too. Jason Tatum was a minus 1.1 on off this year. And, don't get it twisted. I don't think that that's an indication that he was bad this year, because I certainly don't think that was the case. I think it kind of just shows how great of a support system he had on his team, that there were times where he could go out and the Celtics bench, along with, Derek White or Jalen Brown or whoever was left on the floor, were enough to make the Celtics still that much better than the opponent when Jason Tatum was sitting. That the team ultimately, I mean, I don't want to say they didn't need him, but Gavin and I have made this case before. I've certainly made this case with regards to the Celtics when we were talking about these awards, that the Celtics are so good that even without Tatum, they would probably be a 50-something win team. So where does that put him in terms of the all NBA teams? Where does that put him in terms of the MVP voting and all that stuff? So I don't know. I guess my overall thinking after all this is is the all NBA the team achievement award, and the MVP is the who was most valuable to their team and who had the better year award? I don't know, because at least in my estimation, I think that Brunson won. I think that he won all the categories over Tatum. I think that the counting stats he did better. A lot of the advanced stats he did better. Maybe you could argue their defensive stats, but I don't think Tatum blew the world away in that regard, to the extent that you would say oh, that's the difference maker. That's why he should be, the all NBA guy, but not as high up in the MVP standings. So I don't know. I don't know if that's the discrepancy there. If it's just the all NBA teams are more about team performance and the MVP is more about the individual. I don't know. I don't have their stated criteria right in front of me. Nor do I think it would matter, because the criteria I don't think there is a stated criteria, which is the biggest problem with these awards. But then it also changes year to year. I mean, you have people that literally claim on national television that oh yeah, I don't really vote for the best player. I vote for the best narrative. Um, so there's always been something a little twisted about how the NBA awards work, and how, you know, certain players get the spots and other players don't. But either way, I mean, I guess it's good that Jalen Brunson got his All NBA recognition. We knew that was going to happen, and at least it wasn't the third team or something, which would then make you go "Come on, man! What's going on here?" Because he was definitely one of the 5 or 6 best players in the NBA this year, I think, bar none. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it'll just take the league a little more time to come around on Brunson. I will say I think that this year's playoffs maybe went a long way towards that. Just sort of like we sort of saw how last year's playoffs went towards getting Brunson, his All-Star recognition, and now obviously the All-NBA nod after he didn't get either of those last season, but had a phenomenal playoffs, regardless of what some people will tell you. So, I think that that's maybe just where we're at this point. Brunson's just got to chop away, at getting these awards, and maybe by this time next year, he'll get the recognition that he deserves as, one of the top players in the NBA and one of the top 5 players in the NBA. But a couple other quick notes. The Knicks also dropped just surgery update news. So Jalen Brunson, speaking of him, underwent successful hand surgery for that broken hand. He will be reevaluated in 6 to 8 weeks. And Bojan Bogdanovic also underwent successful hand surgery, presumably for that wrist that was giving him trouble. And this is, of course, after he already went through foot surgery for the foot injury that he sustained. So hopefully he recovers well too. He will also be reevaluated in 6 to 8 weeks. So best of luck in recovery to those guys for recovering from those injuries. But I think it's time to start getting into some contracts. So in the next segment, I'm going to get into the guys that are locked in. So I'm going to, if your team run it back, I'm going to let you know who you officially do not have to worry about at all, and just kind of give an idea of where those contracts stand. That'll include Deuce McBride, Josh Hart, Donte DiVincenzo, Mitchell Robinson. So I'll get into that in just a second, then close the show with some of the slightly more complicated guys, the guys with the team options or buyouts or whatever that maybe could be a little confusing. So I'll try to get into all that and give you guys an idea of where the Knicks stand there in just a sec. But first, I got to let you know about our good friends over at Game Time. And what is Game Time? Well, it's the best place to buy tickets, at least in my estimation. Because if you're like me and you're not the most timely person buying tickets, most of the time, every once in a while, I have my moments. For example, I actually got on it and got on a pre-sale for Childish Gambino tickets in August, so I'll get to see one of my favorite artists there. But if you're like me 95% of the time, then you probably are scrambling when you're trying to go to an event, or you're just kind of going by vibes, and you might wake up one day and say, you know what, I feel like going to a game today. And that's especially me when it comes to baseball season. And that's where Game Time can be just a fantastic product. They have last minute tickets, they have flash deals, they have zone deals, all kinds of different ways to find you a way to get in the building and see your favorite team. And usually for much less than anyone else that you can find out there that could sell you a ticket. It's easy to find and buy MLB tickets for every kind of event in your area. You can get views from all seats in the venue, which is amazing. And they have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, all kinds of good stuff to make sure that your ticket purchase is protected. And I'll tell you what my favorite thing is: last minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. So if you weren't like me and you didn't get in on the Childish Gambino pre-sale and you want to go see him, you can think about it for a while and make a decision later on, closer to the event, and know that you'll be able to find a solid deal and have it pointed out to you and say, hey, this person is trying to offload their ticket, and it's actually significantly less than most of these other tickets for where it's at, and it'll be pretty solid. So it's one of my favorite things. But also flash deals and zone deals. You can get for flash deals, they'll put certain seats on sale right before the event so that you can find a really good deal when you need it the most, right before the event. Or zone deals, you can save even more when you just choose a section and let Game Time choose the seat for you. They'll just put you in, the best available seat, and then you get the best available price. It's pretty solid little home run transaction there. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, and I'm back in, and it's time to start going over the Knicks contracts. So I'm going to do this, like I said, one by one, and go through every player on the roster from this past season that's still currently on the roster, I should say. None of the guys that got traded. No point in doing that. But just to go over and give everybody an idea of where the Knicks stand. At the end, I'll probably try to also do a little bit of a salary cap breakdown, just so that everybody can get an idea. Like, you hear words tossed around like luxury tax and over the cap, under the cap, whatever. Like, I understand it's something that I'm nerdy about, but maybe not everybody is nerdy about. So, if it's something that confuses you or whatever, stay tuned for the second part of this episode tomorrow, where I'm going to get into that. I think that'll hopefully be enlightening for you guys. But first, I want to just go through sort of like the sure things here in this episode. So I called this section the locked in guys. These are the guys that are on contracts, short of them being included in a trade or something this summer. You're not going to have to worry about them going forward. You're not going to have to sweat over oh, are they going to resign? Are they going to sign an extension? Like, what's going on with these guys? It's the Knicks. Nobody has to worry about these guys for at least a couple more years. So first, Deuce McBride. He signed a 3-year, $13 million extension almost simultaneously with the OG Anunoby and RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley deal. So that happened, right at the end of December, and 3 years, 13 million is just an insane deal for the Knicks. So it gets even more insane though. Let's get into the numbers. The extension starts at 4.7 million next year and then descends. So then it goes to 4.3 million in 2025 to 26, and then 3.9 million in 2026 to 27. So the deal somehow just gets better for the Knicks each year. They've signed a few players to descending contracts like this. It's I think, a pretty smart tactic by Leon Rose in the front office, probably a Brock Allers special. They're like capologist who looks at these things and says, well, we'll spend the money now. Why don't we spend the money early and then, you know, we can have it descend so that way, these guys can get a better deal potentially if they have an offer, and what's it called, a or a player option later on in their deal, then they can decline that and get themselves a better deal. But for us, it helps with, avoiding the luxury tax and, avoiding things always going up every year. Instead, they can have certain guys descending. So then it gives them a little more flexibility. So Deuce's contract falls into that category. But I'll just say, based off what he did this year, when he got called on for big minutes, plus what he did in the playoffs, like, I think you could reasonably call his contract one of the best value deals in the NBA. Um, I mean, they signed him pretty much the second before he took off, but it's like it's almost like another rookie deal. I mean, he only made I think it was like less than 2 million a season for his first few in the league. So obviously this constitutes like a double raise for him. But in terms of just general NBA contracts, he's making like 3% of the salary cap. Like it's nothing. It is just such a small amount compared to the impact that he could have as, potentially the Knicks. Like, I guess if you're looking at it and trying to project out what their rotation will look like next year, he's probably their, if they just run it back, he's probably their seventh, eighth man, off the bench. I guess it would probably be like, just depends on where you rank. Josh Hart obviously would be the sixth man, and then Mitchell Robinson, I guess, would be the closest guy to challenging him, for real play time. As far as like who gets more minutes, but then Deuce is like right there. If you decide to run this team back as the guy that you want to bring in to supplement Jalen Brunson's minutes and occasionally, have him out there with Brunson because they work really well together. So, yeah, just an amazing contract that Deuce McBride is signed to. And again, he's going to be around for 3 more years starting this coming year. So that's great. Josh Hart similarly signed a 4-year, $81 million extension prior to the season. After he picked up this past year, he made $13 million because he picked up his player option going into this season. So the reason that he did that was basically a favor to the Knicks. I mean, he could have hit free agency as an unrestricted free agent last year and use that to, rake the Knicks over the coals and, say, hey, I want the most money possible. I don't care about, helping you guys sign someone or whatever. Like, I just want to do this, but did a very, very team friendly thing and picked up his $13 million option this year. And then was rewarded the second that he was able to get an extension last offseason after picking up that option, which I think was like August or something. They had to wait just like a little bit before they were able to sign him to the extension. But as soon as possible, signed a 4-year, $81 million extension, which then picking up that $13 million option allowed the Knicks to sign Donte DiVincenzo, which was obviously huge. And I'll talk about DiVincenzo's deal in just a second. But so Josh Hart's deal officially starts this coming season. So he will make 18.1 million next year. Then he'll make 19.5 million in 2025 to 26. Then he'll make 20.9 million in 26 to 27. And then he will have a $22.4 million team option in 2027 to 28, which is pretty. I guess that's the one team friendly thing with this deal. And the Knicks managed to sneak this in a lot with a lot of guys, other than like the top level talent. They sneak in that team option at the end where they say, hey, I assume it's just because they're trying to figure out like, well, how's the luxury tax going to be looking by then? Maybe their thought here was, would we want to include Josh Hart in a trade at some point? I don't think that's going to happen now. I think that of all the guys on the team, I kind of think that the Villanova guys are pretty ironclad at this point. It seems like Jalen Brunson plays better when he has his 2 best buds around him, or as many of his best buds as he can. And they they have just such a sense for each other. But also, like, I mean, Josh Hart, he played phenomenal in this year's playoffs. Like, I know there's some talk about what was the right figure for what Hart was worth before he signed the extension, and there was a little of hemming and hawing about like, oh, is he worth 20 million? Like, is he really that good? Blah blah blah. I think he proved it in this year's playoffs. Like, it's a fine deal. He's a guy that you can count on for anywhere from 20 minutes to 48 minutes, and he'll do it for you. And, you know, the 3-point shooting came around a bit in the playoffs this year. You know, obviously he didn't quite keep it up. The hot level that he shot in the first round didn't quite keep up in the second round, but he does so many other good things. And just, I mean, you can literally count on the guy to play 48 minutes for you. You can count on him to play 40 plus with a, you know, his abdomen falling apart. And the guy's just a warrior. So I don't think there's any arguments there. But so yeah, he's around for at least the next 3 years with the Knicks, and possibly 4. His deal, actually, if that option year would get picked up, in theory, as of this second, he's the guy signed the furthest out for the Knicks. But you know, we'll see as this goes on. I think a lot of deals are going to line up where it's guys are going to have their deals expiring at very similar times. So, like Donte DiVincenzo, for example, who I'll just jump right into right now, he signed a 4-year, $50 million deal prior to this season, which kicked off this season, and so that was his first year was this past season. He still has 3 seasons left on his deal, so he made 10.9 million this season. He'll make 11.4 million next season, and then 12 million in 25 to 26, and 12.5 million in 26 to 27. Stop me if I sound like a broken record here, but again, one of the best value contracts in the NBA. I don't think that's debatable. I mean, the fact that he's making, I mean, I guess about 10% of the salary cap, slightly less, like 9% maybe. I guess if you're going to break down, because I think the salary cap is around 150 million going into this upcoming season. Um, but you know, making that little of an amount compared to the fact that he was top 3 in both threes taken and made this year. In fact, number 3 on both those lists, trailing only just you know, some whatever company, Stephen Curry and Luka Doncic. You know, I mean, some guys you probably never heard of. Yeah, it's those 2, and then it's Donte DiVincenzo at the top of the 3-point shooting leaderboard. So pretty solid company for $12 million annual value on your contract, or very slightly less than that. So yeah, I think the Knicks did all right for themselves with that contract. And things will probably just continue to get better. Well, or maybe at least stay the same. I mean, there's no way that deal ever becomes a negative if DiVincenzo plays like even 85% of the player that he played as this past season. So, yeah, another great deal for the Knicks. And so, again, we're seeing here guys have their deals kind of lined up so that, you know, both those players and the Knicks can kind of make their decisions at around the same time. So, Josh Hart and Donte DiVincenzo likely will be on a similar timeline as far as when they're thinking about, you know, their free agencies and stuff like that. And then lastly, Mitchell Robinson signed a 4-year descending $60 million extension in 2022. He has 2 years remaining, so he'll make $14.3 million next season and $13 million the season after. So again, it's descending, similar to the Deuce McBride contract, similar to the Jalen Brunson contract, which I'll talk about in the next episode tomorrow when I go over his contract and the potential ramifications of an extension. But so I think it's pretty hard to argue that Mitch hasn't been worth his deal too, considering how dominant he could be when he's healthy. Of course, like the caveat here is that it's when healthy, and health has been an issue for Mitch the last couple of years and kind of his whole career, whether it's fluke injuries or ones like this season where it makes you worry a little more about his lower body health and stuff like that. But undoubtedly, I think he's been one of the most easily loved Knicks of all time. I don't even think just of this era or anything else. Like, I mean, he's funny. He's, you know, it's been great watching him kind of grow up on this team. Like, he's very lovable as a Knicks player, as a fan. And then I still think that he offers a lot on the court with the offensive rebounding and everything else to make that contract valuable. He's also the reigning longest tenured player on the team. having come in the 2018 draft, almost unprecedented compared to the rest of the roster as far as how long he's been with the team. So, um, I've been mentioning his name a lot lately in terms of if the Knicks are going to make a big trade this offseason and they re-sign Isaiah Hartenstein, there's a decent chance he gets traded, which would be sad in its own respect. But um, either way, if they do decide to keep him and they do decide to run it back, he's on a fantastic contract. I think one that values him very fairly and the contributions that he brings to the floor. But there are some guys with deals that are slightly more complicated, and one in particular, Bojan Bogdanovic, that I got asked about in the comments on YouTube yesterday. So I want to get into that, and then I'll actually talk about two guys at the end of the bench who could play a part this summer in whatever the Knicks decide they want to try to do as far as trades and stuff. So I'll get to that in just a sec when we come back. But first, this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. And hey, we all carry around different stressors, big and small. And when we keep them bottled up, it can start to affect us negatively. I certainly go through that. Therapy is a safe space to get things off your chest and to figure out how to work through whatever's weighing you down. And, it can be helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It can empower you to be the best version of yourself. And it isn't just for those who have experienced major trauma or anything like that. Like therapy can be good just to keep you going on a day to day. Like the little things count too, and the little things add up. So it's like you might have a big stressor, maybe you have a family member who's sick or something like that. And obviously, those are the sort of things that we think about when we think about therapy. But little things like being stressed about work or being stressed about your relationship or feeling conflicted about one thing or another, those things all add up too, and they stack up in your brain, and then all of a sudden that those bunch of little issues suddenly add up to a big issue and can kind of uh, affect your mood, affect how you're feeling, all kinds of stuff. So that's where therapy comes in. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, you should maybe give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and then you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. All right, and I'm back in to keep going through some Knicks contracts. Again, a little too much for one episode. Plus, I don't know. I feel like I'm droning on and on. This is like such a nerdy episode, but one that hopefully is helpful to some of you guys, that are curious about what's going on with the contract situations and all that, and what to expect going into the off season. Again, it's something that I take great joy in. I'm that type of guy that goes on NBA 2K and will play the franchise mode and like play every 10th game or whatever, but sit there for hours of you know going through all the contracts and trying to make trades and doing all kinds of stuff like that. So it's definitely my one of my preferred uh, subgenres of NBA content. So I'm always happy to talk about it. So hopefully it's useful to you guys. I'll talk about now one guy that I got asked specifically about in the YouTube comments yesterday, which actually inspired me to kind of make this whole episode and the whole next episode as well, to just kind of give this idea for you guys of where everybody stands. So Bojan Bogdanovic, what is the deal with him? And this actually, I almost forgot that he had this, to be completely honest. So I'm glad that the commenter on YouTube brought it up. But his contract, it has a $19 million year coming up on it. So the final year of his contract, but it is partially guaranteed. So I don't think it's technically considered a team option. The NBA is weird like that. Like there's like player options, or there's early termination options, and like all this other stuff. There's like all these different ways of phrasing things. But I think that in this case, this isn't technically considered a team option, because that would mean that the full year becomes guaranteed or non-guaranteed. So this is just considered a partially guaranteed year of his contract that the Knicks get to make the decision on. So basically what that means, if the Knicks decide by a set deadline which was laid out in the contract. I think I read somewhere that it was June 28th. I'm having a little bit of I had a hard time finding that exact article again to find when that guarantee date is, but it's going to be somewhere between the draft and the start of free agency. Usually it's like a day or two before the start of free agency that players will negotiate to have these partial guarantee, lock-in dates set by. So if it is the 28th or maybe it's the 29th, whatever day it is, the Knicks will have to make a decision by that day if they want to fully guarantee Bojan Bogdanovic's contract. Now, should they decide to fully guarantee it, then he's going to make $19 million next year. So that's how that's going to work. That's it. They just say, you know, cool, we're bringing you back, sign on the dotted line, and then it's good to go. However, if they're looking at the cap situation and they're saying, like, oh, I think we have something lined up that's going to, cost more money. Oh, we're worried about how much we're going to pay OG Anunoby and Isaiah Hartenstein. We're worried about how that might affect us in the luxury tax, which again, I'll get into the luxury tax a bit in the next episode and how that could affect the Knicks, as far as if they re-sign Isaiah Hartenstein and OG Anunoby and there's certain numbers and, if that gets them over a certain threshold for salary, maybe the Knicks look at that and they say, oh, this is going to be too harmful. We don't have any trades in particular lined up that could take advantage of having Bogdanovic and that $19 million deal. And we just don't think he's going to contribute enough on the court. Then they can say, okay, we're going to buy your contract out. So if they, before that deadline, say, you know what, actually, we'd like to move on from you, they can sign a thing then and say, we're going to pay you $2 million and then you can go be a free agent. That's how the partial guarantee works. So only $2 million of the contract is guaranteed to Bogdanovic if the Knicks were to cut him prior to the cut date. So what that would mean for the Knicks then is if they cut him, he's gone, he's off the team, and then there would be a $2 million cap hold placed on their salary cap for this coming year. So Bogdanovic would still count as $2 million in salary towards their salary cap for this coming year instead of the much larger 19 million that he would have if they fully guaranteed the contract. So that's basically that. If you're asking me what I think they're going to do, I don't think that they're going to non-guarantee it. I think it would be pretty extreme to do that, to be completely honest. I do think that like the Knicks themselves are going to have to get comfortable with the idea of being a tax-paying team sooner than later, which brings some restrictions with it as far as team building and stuff. But I think they're well equipped with having a number of draft picks going forward, having tradable contracts that they can then push in for that like one last big move to try to put them over the top, whether that's like trying to trade for Donovan Mitchell or Paul George or, whoever, making that last big move is very attainable for them. And then at that point, like you're kind of locked in on that core anyway. And maybe you could do a little finagling and trade off a guy or two here or there to try to get back under the tax for a year and then try to reload and, build the team a little differently around Brunson. And, maybe you still have Randall or, Hart, DiVincenzo, whatever. You have different ideas about, how you want to build the team. You can find a way to kind of get back down under that luxury tax number again. But I think that if the Knicks want to become a true contender next year, which I think by all means they should, and there's a case that running it back does that for you, then they should just go ahead and get comfortable with the idea of the luxury tax and keep Bogdanovic's contract because it's easily the most valuable trade chip that they're going to have on the team. Very similar to how Evan Fournier this past year, they picked up his final year option and then used him as a trade chip to get Bogdanovic and essentially kick the can a little further down the line. So if it were me, I'm picking up the option. But just so that everyone's clear, there is an option where the Knicks can say at a date slightly after the draft and before free agency where they go, you know what? No, let's cut bait. It's only a $2 million hit. We don't need Bogdanovic next year. We don't need him for a trade piece. We're just going to run it back, draft some guys. We're pretty happy with that. Okay. I just don't see that happening. So, but it is available. Then we've got two other guys that are in very similar boats. So I'll kind of lump them together. DaQuan Jeffries and Jericho Sims at the end of the bench. So they're both they're both on more or less minimum contracts. Sims, I think, is slightly more than minimum. But DaQuan Jeffries was on a minimum contract this year. He's expiring. There is a team option on that, which I'll get to in a second. But if the Knicks ultimately decline that team option, they would be able to sign him with what's called non-bird rights. So we'll talk about bird rights more in the next episode when we talk about OG Anunoby, Isaiah Hartenstein, and those guys. All the free agents and how that works. But since Jeffries was only signed for one season with the Knicks, you get what's called non-bird rights, which is just essentially you can give a player that you had signed for 1 year 120% raise on what they made the year prior. So if you made $1 million, you can make 1.2 million the next year, just as a baseline number. So the Knicks could choose to do that with Jeffries. They could just let him walk. They could decline the player option. But that said, he does have a player option, which I think if the Knicks think that they have some sort of trade lined up, they're going to pick this option up prior to free agency starting. They have right up until the eve of free agency to make this decision on if they want to pick up this option or not. It would be for about 2.5 million, which is pretty significant. I mean, honestly, for not to put it this way, but like for Jeffries, like I don't think he would get that on the open market. But I think the Knicks did this intentionally because they want to potentially have that extra little bit of salary to put them over the top if they want to go for a player like, I keep bringing him up, but if they would go after Paul George, for example, there's a world where they could do that without touching most of their core players. You could get away with it by my math, if I'm correct, by trading uh, Bojan Bogdanovic, Mitchell Robinson, DaQuan Jeffries, Jericho Sims, who I'm about to get into in a second, and one of the players that they draft in the draft this year at either the 24th or 25th pick. That could get you to the salary to get Paul George, and you still leave like most of your rotation intact. Um, so maybe that's an option that would be appealing to the Knicks. I think that's why there's a decent chance they might pick up the $2.5 million option on Jeffries prior to the start of free agency. So that's just something to, think about, keep your eyes on. If you see something out there that says the Knicks picked up DaQuan Jeffries option, I think there's a decent chance they think that a trade or something is coming along. Because otherwise I think that he's honestly pretty expendable. Jericho Sims similarly has a team option for next year, slightly lower cap figure, 2.1 million. So with him, I think regardless of if the Knicks plan to use him in a trade or not, I'd expect them to keep him. Like Sims has proven himself to be a pretty useful player, especially for that cap figure. He's subbed in when they need, an auxiliary big, when they need a third string center. He's always there. And, the minutes aren't always the prettiest, but he's definitely an NBA player. Like, I think he's going to have a fairly long career, where he just plays this exact role and makes a couple million a season and, can go out there and give you some dunks and a little bit of, rim protection in the sense of just keeping guys away from the rim and all this stuff that he does well. So, but similarly to Jeffries, that $2.1 million could make a difference. Like between the two of them, you're looking at like $4.5 million, which is a valuable little chunk to try to get you towards that tradable amount where you can, in a trade, receive 120% more than the salary you're sending out. So every little bit counts with kind of pushing you up that ladder to eventually get you to the point of being able to execute a trade. That might be where Sims ends up. So, but they have to decide on both those guys before free agency starts. So that's it for today's episode. That's the end of today's, guys. Hopefully that was informative for you all. But in the next episode, I'm going to get into the guys who could extend, which is Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle. They're up for extensions this coming offseason. And the guys who are free agents. So that'll be OG Anunoby, Isaiah Hartenstein, Precious Achua, and Alec Burks, who are all free agents and have varying levels of money that the Knicks are allowed to pay them, varying amounts of money that the Knicks, will have to decide how much they want to pay them. But like OG Anunoby, for example, has a very high max number. I don't know that the Knicks will hit it, but it's on the table. Whereas Isaiah Hartenstein, they might run into some issues where they're limited by how much they can pay him compared to another team because of the fact that he's only coming off of a 2-year contract rather than a 3-year deal. So I'll explain all that in the next episode. But for today, thank you all for listening, and I'll talk to you all soon. Peace out, everybody.